Hello, this is Chris Browder, and this is video 3.1. This is video 3.1 in a series on second language acquisition theory and research. We're going to be talking about first language acquisition. This is the first in a three-part series for lesson 3. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about first language acquisition, then we're going to be talking about bilingualism. Then we're going to be talking about age and how age affects second language acquisition. All right, so let's see. This presentation is largely based on the text How Languages Are Learned by Lightbound and Spada, but I pull from other sources as well, and I'll try my best to cite those. So let's begin. Linguists at this point all agree that children are born with some special talent for learning their first language. The question at this point is, how exactly does that talent work? Let's not misunderstand that children are born already knowing languages or simply absorb them passively like sponges. People always say that, but no, children are not sponges. Children are children. Research shows that children need actual interaction with live human beings. They can't just simply have input like a television or a radio or DVD or whatever. Um, we cannot simply put a television in the room showing Korean dramas and magically get a kid who is fluent in Korean. It just simply doesn't work that way. Children and the people in their lives basically have to work together or cooperate so the children can learn the language. New technology has allowed researchers to actually study and even measure children's attention and concentration. They have concluded that children actively pay attention to the language around them, make an effort to learn the language, and even seem to actively practice what they're learning in much the same way some highly motivated adults might practice a language they are learning. More importantly, children really seem to be acquiring rules somehow and applying them very creatively. In short, children's first language might be facilitated by special talents, but it is not mindless imitation, and they are not sponges that simply soak things up. One of the most important realities of first language acquisition is that children go through very predictable developmental stages when learning their first language. In fact, every aspect of language develops in stages. For example, children spend the first year of their lives in the first stage of development for phonology. They immediately learn to distinguish human language from other sounds and actively pay attention to the people talking around them. In the first year of their lives, children have an incredible ability to distinguish between phonemes that are really very similar, such as the P sound in pa or the B sound in ba. And in some languages, these two might be merged somewhat, or they might have different versions of the B sound that are very subtly different, that we adults might not be able to hear the difference in, but these very young children can hear these differences. And we know that from this new technology that can actually pick up on what they're paying attention to and when they're detecting something different or a change in the input. So, interestingly, while they're learning to distinguish these sounds with their auditory ability, they also actually seem to be practicing them with their mouths. In this early stage called babbling, children constantly vocalize and master these phonemes and gradually build a larger and larger repertoire of them until they have collected what they need from the input around them. So they might start out, for example, by making cooing noises that are mostly seem to be like a vowel practice. But then they move on to like pa 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 pa, ma 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 ma, ka 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 ka. Interestingly, once they have gotten what they need from that input to, learn the phonemic system of the language, this incredible talent for distinguishing between very similar phonemes seems to actually vanish. Yes, This ability or gift that children have seems to vanish at a very young age. It's as if they've listened long enough to set their phonemic parameters to the target language, and once they are set, they move on. What do they move on to? Well, usually children will be understanding common words well before they are 1 year old and will start producing them after the age of 1. Linguists refer to this second stage as the single word stage. These children make simple one word utterances such as mama and dada. By the age of 2, most children have acquired at least 50 words and are beginning to combine them to form two word sentences like daddy bye bye and kitty go. Eventually, they start combining 3 or more words, like in baby play kitty and daddy fall down. This stage is called telegraphic speech because, like the telegraph messages in the old days, it is missing morphemes, articles, prepositions, and other ingredients that augment words or fill the spaces between them. By the time children are 3, their utterances usually resemble sentences. They begin using articles, prepositions, and even morphemes such as tense markers and plurals. This final stage can be referred to as completion, but let's not assume they're done there. The development of morphemes, syntax, and other aspects of languages also comes in stages. So, for example, children usually start using the ing morpheme before they start using other morphemes. So, for example, they might say, they might move from baby play to baby playing. After that, they usually start adding the plural s, as in toys. Generally, the auxiliary be verb comes at the very last, as in the baby is playing. Again, this is not imitation. Children use this grammar to produce and comprehend utterances they have never heard before, like, my dino ate the bad daddy. Simply put, children are creative. Linguists and psychologists have struggled for decades to understand exactly how children learn their first languages. Children's brains are not fully developed, and children are normally not capable of learning complex behaviors, systems, procedures, or rules. Yet they somehow manage to master a language, which is quite a task. Most adult second language learners never fully master the target language, yet children somehow master their first language well before the age of 7. Back in the 1950s, behavioral psychologists claimed that children's main advantage was that they were blank slates. In other words, they're very easy to fill because they're empty. Today, no linguist or psychologist would assert that children simply fill up with language passively or mindlessly imitate what they hear. Most linguists suspect that children have some innate abilities, but they are not sure what those are or how they work. In 1959, a linguist named Noam Chomsky argued that children come to know much more about the language than what they could possibly learn from the input they're given. He hypothesized that children had some special ability to figure out the rules of the language, and he originally referred to this ability as a language acquisition device, but eventually created his theory of universal grammar to explain how it works. Chomsky pointed out in his theory of universal grammar that there really are not unlimited possibilities for human languages. All languages have certain things in common. For example, all languages have subjects, objects, and verbs. The order or syntax can vary, but in reality, only the verb moves. In other words, a language can be verb subject object, subject verb object verb, but could not be object subject verb. If a child instinctively knows this, then he can figure out which order the language follows just by listening to it for a while. Similarly, languages that follow one rule always follow other rules. So once the children figure out one of the rules, they get the other rules for free. For example, languages that are subject verb object, like English, place prepositions before the object. So, for example, in English, we say, I go to school. But languages that are subject object verb use postpositions instead. So, for example, in Korean, they would say, I school to go or 학교에 가요. If children innately know these options are so limited, then they don't have to imagine all of the unlimited possibilities. It's more like making an educated guess on a multiple choice or true false test compared to writing a PhD dissertation. The same is true for other aspects of language as well. Take phonemics, for example. Certain sounds are universal to all human languages, such as ma and ba, although they vary from language to language in how they are pronounced. Interestingly, these are sounds that the babies start to make when they first start to babble. In other words, the most common sounds in the human language are the first sounds that come out of the baby's mouth. Likewise, there are many sounds that humans can make with their mouths that are not used in any human language. Like, that's a sound I can very easily make with my mouth, but no human languages use that sound. Human languages have th, the, z, v, b, k, g, h, sh, but they don't have. It's just simply is not on the menu. So let's see. Now that we realize that our mouths can make that sound, but they don't, we realize that there are really limited possibilities, not unlimited possibilities for human languages. Children don't have to deduce every possibility, they have to just figure out limited possibilities. And that gives them a big advantage. It's as if children have a set of parameters in their brains and they simply have to adjust those parameters to match the settings of the languages they are learning. Now, here's a little disclaimer here. Chomsky no longer adheres strictly to the theory of universal grammar, and he's always rejected this label, an innatist. He does not like being called an innatist. I think now, these days, he says what's really universal in human beings is our brains and the way our brains perceive the world around us, that we make sense of reality a certain way, and our languages simply reflect our universals in perception. So if you're born with a brain and you're human, then you're born with universal grammar. It's not that you're born with the language. All right, so let's see. But this must lead you to wonder, because this is a class on second language acquisition theory and research. Do adults have access to this universal grammar? Does this special talent for language learning disappear as we get older? We'll talk more about this in later videos. Thanks a lot.